I spent a year working as a maintenance man on base. When the colonel tried to humiliate me in front of the brass, I stood up and revealed my real stars. I arrived at Fort Harrison with nothing but a duffel bag and 15 years of military experience hidden beneath my new maintenance uniform. The security guard barely glanced at my freshly printed ID badge before waving me through the checkpoint. This was my first day undercover, and already the lax security protocols confirmed why I'd been sent here. Devin met me at the maintenance building, a stocky man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. He gave me a quick handshake and led me inside without small talk. "This is our new electrical specialist," Devin announced to the small group gathered in the break room. "He'll be helping with the backlog of repair tickets." Marcus, a burly plumber with tattoos covering both arms, looked me up and down. "You don't look like an electrician," he said. I shrugged. "Been fixing things my whole life." Devin handed me a clipboard with my first assignments. "Start with the officers' quarters. They've been complaining about power fluctuations." I spent the morning rewiring a faulty circuit panel in the east wing. The job was simple enough, but I intentionally took my time to observe the officers coming and going. They all gave me strange looks, some even stopping mid-conversation when I entered a room. At 0900, Colonel Grant walked past with his executive assistant, Brielle. He glared at me with unusual intensity for someone who'd supposedly never met me before. "Why is maintenance working during my morning briefing?" he snapped at Brielle. "The work order was approved yesterday, sir," she replied, avoiding eye contact with me. Colonel Grant muttered something under his breath and stormed off. I continued working, pretending not to notice the interaction. By lunchtime, I'd fixed 3 separate electrical issues and gathered valuable intelligence about the base layout. I sat alone in the cafeteria, watching the officers at their separate tables. They kept glancing in my direction. Jamal, another electrician on the maintenance crew, approached my table with his lunch tray. "Mind if I join you?" "Free country," I said. He sat down and immediately started talking about a security system failure in the West Wing. "They want us to check it out this afternoon. You know anything about CCTV systems?" I almost said too much before catching myself. "A little. I can figure it out." We spent the afternoon repairing the security cameras, and I had to be careful not to reveal how familiar I was with military-grade surveillance systems. Jamal watched me closely as I bypassed the encryption lock without hesitation. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked, suspicion evident in his voice. I shrugged again. Previous job had similar systems. That evening, I was checking the maintenance logs when Brandon appeared at my door. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since our last deployment. "Fancy meeting you here," he said quietly, checking the hallway before entering. "What are you doing in maintenance quarters?" I asked. Brandon lowered his voice. "Colonel Grant's been asking questions about you. He thinks something's off with your background check." "Already?" I was surprised. "It's only been 1 day." "Be careful," Brandon warned. "Make some mistakes. You're too good at this." After he left, I took his advice. The next morning, I deliberately crossed some wires while fixing a light fixture. Devin had to correct my work, and I apologized profusely, claiming I was still learning the base's electrical systems. 3 days into my assignment, Sloan from administration delivered a folder to my workstation. "These need to go to maintenance records," she said, sliding the documents across my desk. As soon as she left, I opened the folder. Inside were classified documents about base security protocols that no maintenance worker should have access to. This was either a serious mistake or a deliberate test. I returned the documents to administration immediately. "These were delivered to me by mistake," I told Sloan, who looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, thank you for bringing these back," she said, but her eyes didn't match her grateful tone. That afternoon, Terrence from base security stopped me at a checkpoint. He studied my badge for nearly a minute, comparing my face to the photo with unusual intensity. "Problem?" I asked. "No problem," he said slowly, "just being thorough." That night, I called Victor from a secure line off base. "Things are strange here," I explained. "Everyone's watching me. Colonel Grant seems to have it out for me already." "The mission remains critical," Victor replied. "We need to know what's happening at Fort Harrison. Continue as planned." When I returned to my quarters, I noticed something different about the air vent. A closer inspection revealed a small surveillance camera hidden inside. Someone was monitoring the maintenance crew quarters. The next morning, I spotted Colonel Grant watching me from across the motor pool. His expression was unreadable, but his focus was unmistakable. This assignment was definitely more complicated than my initial briefing suggested. I continued my work, fixing electrical problems throughout the base while gathering information. Each day brought more suspicious behavior from the officers. They treated me with a mixture of disdain and caution that made no sense for a simple maintenance worker. Last month, General Pierce walked into the officers' club while I was repairing lights. He nodded at me in a way that felt too respectful for my current position. Colonel Grant noticed the interaction and immediately pulled the general aside. I pretended to focus on my work while straining to hear their conversation. Colonel Grant was asking about verification protocols for new personnel. General Pierce seemed unconcerned. 3 months into my assignment, I overheard Colonel Grant on a phone call to the Pentagon. "I need verification on his identity immediately," he said urgently. "Something doesn't add up." My cover was holding, but barely. I needed to be more careful, make more deliberate mistakes, and appear less competent than I actually was. The mission depended on it. Yesterday, during the monthly inspection, I was fixing an air conditioning unit when Colonel Grant entered with several visiting officials from Washington. I kept my head down, focusing on my work, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. The mission was becoming more dangerous by the day, but I had to see it through. Fort Harrison was hiding something important, and I was going to find out what it was, even if Colonel Grant was determined to expose me first. I messed up during my third week at Fort Harrison. Marcus caught me reading a classified equipment manual I shouldn't have known existed. We were repairing a junction box in the communications center when he asked about the strange power fluctuations affecting the secure servers. It's probably the new encryption modules, I said without thinking. The Mark 7 systems always draw excessive power during initialization cycles. Marcus stared at me. How do you know about Mark 7 modules? Those manuals are classified. I realized my mistake immediately. Just heard some officers talking about it, I mumbled, but the damage was done. Marcus nodded slowly and finished the job in silence. I watched him head straight to Colonel Grant's office afterward. Through the window, I could see them talking, Marcus gesturing animatedly, while Colonel Grant's face darkened. That evening, I was replacing light fixtures in the hallway outside Colonel Grant's office when I heard him on the phone. His voice carried through the partially open door. "I need a complete background verification on our new maintenance worker," he said tersely. "Something's not adding up. He knows things no electrician should know." I continued working, pretending not to hear. Colonel Grant lowered his voice, but I still caught fragments about Pentagon clearance and possible security breach. The next morning, Terrence from security was suddenly everywhere I went. He followed me between jobs, always finding reasons to be in the same building. His presence wasn't subtle. "Brandon found me in the supply closet later that day. They've doubled the security protocols because of you," he whispered. "Colonel Grant pulled your entire file from Central Command." "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough. They're comparing your work history with known military personnel databases." I needed to act fast. That night, I accessed the base computer system through a maintenance terminal and planted several false information trails about my background. Nothing too obvious, just enough inconsistencies to create confusion. Karina, from military intelligence, bumped into me the following day while I was repairing the officer's lounge lighting. She casually mentioned a routine security interview for all maintenance personnel. "Just protocol," she said with a practiced smile. "Nothing to worry about." The interview lasted 2 hours. Karina asked detailed questions about my background, previous employment, and technical knowledge. I played my role perfectly, appearing nervous but cooperative, making small technical errors when explaining basic electrical concepts. "You seem very knowledgeable for someone with your background," she noted. I shrugged. "I read a lot." 3 days later, General Pierce arrived unexpectedly. I was changing air filters in the conference room when he walked in with his staff. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. "Carry on, Sergeant," he said automatically, then caught himself. Colonel Grant, who had been showing the general around, turned pale. "Sir, this is just maintenance staff," he corrected quickly. General Pierce stared at me for a moment longer than necessary. "Of course, my mistake." The tension in the room was palpable. Colonel Grant's eyes darted between us, his suspicion now fully ignited. I kept my head down and continued working, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back. Later that afternoon, Colonel Grant called an emergency staff meeting. I volunteered to repair the faulty thermostat in the meeting room, giving me perfect cover to listen in while working behind an access panel. "We have reason to believe we may have unauthorized personnel on base," Colonel Grant announced to his officers. "I want increased security checks on all non-military staff, especially maintenance workers." I memorized every word while pretending to focus on the wiring. They discussed increased surveillance, background verification procedures, and possible motivations for infiltration. Colonel Grant was convinced I was military intelligence or possibly even a foreign operative. Terrence was assigned to shadow me full-time. He followed me everywhere, reporting my movements directly to Colonel Grant. I made sure to make my rounds predictable, always appearing focused solely on my maintenance duties. A week later, Brielle stopped me in the hallway. She looked nervous. "I shouldn't tell you this," she whispered, "but Colonel Grant is planning to expose you at the monthly inspection next week. He's bringing in Pentagon officials to witness it." "Expose me?" I kept my expression neutral. "For what?" "He thinks you're not who you say you are." She glanced around nervously. "He's been collecting evidence for weeks." I thanked her and continued my rounds, mind racing. That evening, while repairing Colonel Grant's private bathroom, I discovered a file he'd left open on his desk. It detailed his ongoing disputes with higher command over base funding and security protocols. The documents revealed his personal vendetta against several Pentagon officials who had questioned his leadership. This explained his aggressive stance toward anyone he perceived as a threat to his authority. Evan cornered me the next day as I was finishing repairs in the secure communications room. "How did you get clearance for this area?" he demanded. "Maintenance requests for secure areas require officer approval." I showed him the work order with Devon's signature. "Standard procedure. The cooling system was malfunctioning." "Devon. You've accessed every secure area on this base in just 2 months, he noted. "That's unusual for maintenance staff." I shrugged. "I go where the broken things are." That night, Terrence and 2 security officers conducted a surprise inspection of my quarters. I had anticipated this and made sure everything was perfectly in order, with nothing to find except basic maintenance manuals and personal items. "Looking for something specific?" I asked as they searched. "Just routine," Terrence replied, clearly disappointed at finding nothing suspicious. I knew the confrontation was coming soon. Colonel Grant was gathering his evidence and preparing his moment. I continued my work, fixing electrical problems throughout the base while gathering every bit of intelligence I could. The monthly inspection was 3 days away. General Pierce would return with officials from Washington. Colonel Grant had arranged for me to be working in a highly visible area during the inspection. His plan was obvious: public exposure to maximize my humiliation and his triumph. I was ready for him. 15 years in the Army had taught me patience. I would let Colonel Grant spring his trap, and then I would spring mine. The morning of the monthly inspection arrived with a sense of finality. Colonel Grant had been planning this moment for weeks. I could feel it in the air as I gathered my tools for the day's assignments. Devon handed me my work order with a knowing look. You're scheduled to fix the air conditioning in conference room A during the inspection. Priority job. I nodded. I'll handle it. Blake arrived with his Pentagon entourage around 10. They moved through the base like a small parade, Colonel Grant leading the way with his chest puffed out. I positioned myself under the air conditioning unit in conference room A. Tools spread around me, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The inspection group entered the room at exactly the scheduled time. Colonel Grant immediately zeroed in on my presence. What is maintenance doing in here during our inspection? He demanded loudly. I kept working, not looking up. Emergency repair, sir. The cooling system is malfunctioning. Colonel Grant turned to Blake and the other officials with a thin smile. Perfect timing, actually. I wanted to discuss our security protocols, and this presents an excellent example. I continued working on the unit, removing the access panel and checking the wiring. Colonel Grant positioned himself directly behind me. This man has been working at Fort Harrison for several months now, Colonel Grant announced to the room. He came with excellent recommendations and paperwork. Blake looked uncomfortable. Is there an issue with maintenance personnel, Colonel? I believe there is. Colonel Grant's voice dripped with satisfaction. Our maintenance worker here has accessed every secure area on this base. He's demonstrated knowledge of classified systems no civilian contractor should possess. I kept my focus on the air conditioning unit, methodically testing connections. The room had gone completely silent. Furthermore, Colonel Grant continued, I've conducted a thorough investigation into his background. The credentials he provided don't match any records in the national database. Blake shifted nervously. Colonel, perhaps this discussion should happen in private. No, I think this is a perfect teaching moment about security vulnerabilities. Colonel Grant moved closer to me. Tell us who you really are. I continued working, not responding. Colonel Grant's face reddened. I've spent weeks tracking your movements, documenting your suspicious behavior. You've been in every restricted area on this base. You've demonstrated knowledge of classified systems. You've been observed meeting secretly with other personnel. The Pentagon officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. I remained focused on my task. Your work history is fabricated, Colonel Grant pressed. Your technical certifications don't exist in any database. You're either a spy or military intelligence. Which is it? I finally paused my work but didn't turn around. I'm just doing my job, sir. Your job? Colonel Grant laughed harshly. Your job is clearly not maintenance. No electrician knows how to bypass encryption on Mark 7 modules without proper training. Blake cleared his throat. Colonel, I really think... No, Mr. Blake. This is exactly what's wrong with base security these days. Too many unknown elements allowed access without proper vetting. Colonel Grant turned to Terrence. Detain him immediately. We'll get to the bottom of this. Terrence stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. Sir. Yes, sir. I slowly put down my tools and wiped my hands on a rag. The room was completely silent as everyone watched this drama unfold. Colonel Grant, I said calmly, are you absolutely certain you want to pursue this course of action? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied confidently. You've been caught. I stood up and turned to face the room. Very well. With deliberate movements, I unbuttoned my maintenance coveralls and removed them. Underneath was my military uniform with all appropriate insignia clearly visible. The stars on my shoulder boards gleamed under the conference room lights. Blake's jaw dropped. He immediately snapped to attention and saluted. General, sir, I had no idea you were on base. The other Pentagon officials quickly followed suit, saluting crisply. Colonel Grant's face drained of all color as he stared at my uniform, unable to process what he was seeing. At ease, I said calmly. Colonel Grant, you were correct about one thing. I am not a maintenance worker. Colonel Grant opened and closed his mouth several times before finding his voice. I don't understand. Why would you... Operation Base Integrity, I explained to the room. A comprehensive evaluation of security protocols and leadership effectiveness across key military installations. Blake nodded in understanding. Of course, we were briefed that these evaluations would be happening, but not which bases or when. Colonel Grant looked like he might faint. Sir, had I known... That was precisely the point, Colonel, I interrupted. You weren't supposed to know. No one was. That's how we get accurate assessments of base operations and security. Terrence stood frozen, his hand still halfway to his sidearm. I turned to him with a slight smile. You can stand down, Terrence. Your thoroughness in monitoring my activities was actually commendable, though your reporting channels need improvement. Blake stepped forward. General, we had no idea you were conducting a field evaluation personally. This is unprecedented. Desperate times call for desperate measures, I replied. Fort Harrison has experienced concerning security breaches over the past year. We needed to understand the vulnerabilities from the ground level. Colonel Grant had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Sir, had I been informed of your operation, I could have assisted. Again, missing the point, Colonel, I said firmly. The fact that I maintained my cover for 3 months despite your suspicions reveals critical flaws in your verification protocols. The room remained silent as the implications sank in. Colonel Grant's career was effectively over, and everyone knew it. Mr. Blake, I said, turning to the Pentagon official, I'll need your team to join me for a complete debriefing. I've gathered extensive data on operations here that requires immediate attention. Blake nodded eagerly. Of course, General, whatever you need. I turned back to Colonel Grant, who stood rigidly at attention, sweat beading on his forehead. Colonel, you'll report to my temporary office at 0800 tomorrow to discuss the findings of my evaluation. Yes, sir, he managed to say, his voice barely audible. I gathered my maintenance tools and placed them neatly in the toolbox. The air conditioning unit is fixed, by the way. It was just a loose connection causing the temperature fluctuations. As I walked out of the conference room with Blake and his team following behind me, I could feel Colonel Grant's stare burning into my back. The mission had been successful, but the real work was just beginning. Fort Harrison had serious problems, and I had uncovered each one while changing light bulbs and fixing electrical outlets. Sometimes the best way to see the truth was from the bottom up, not the top down. The Pentagon officials scrambled to attention after my revelation. Blake looked mortified, glancing between me and Colonel Grant. The room felt frozen in time. "General, please accept our deepest apologies," Blake said, his voice shaking slightly. "Had we known about your undercover operation?" "At ease," I replied. "Your reaction is precisely why I couldn't inform anyone beforehand." Colonel Grant stood rigidly at attention, face pale as paper. I could see his career flashing before his eyes. Good, he'd earned this moment. I turned to the assembled officials. "Let's move this discussion to the command center. We have much to review." The officials followed me out, leaving Colonel Grant standing alone in the conference room. I heard Terrence hurry after us, unsure where his loyalties should now lie. An hour later, I conducted a formal briefing in the secured command center. The room was packed with Pentagon officials and senior base officers. Colonel Grant sat in the back, looking like he might vomit. "Operation Base Integrity has revealed critical security vulnerabilities at Fort Harrison," I began. "Over 3 months, I accessed every restricted area using minimal credentials and outdated authorization codes. I displayed security footage showing my movements throughout the base." The officials looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. "Base personnel repeatedly failed to verify identities or question suspicious activities," I continued. "Classified materials were left unsecured in multiple locations." Quote, Blake took notes furiously. "What actions do you recommend, General?" "Complete overhaul of security protocols," I replied, "and leadership changes, effective immediately." Colonel Grant flinched visibly. I pretended not to notice. After the briefing, Marcus approached me in the hallway. His face showed a mixture of shock and embarrassment. "Sir, I had no idea," he stammered. "Your electrical work was actually impressive. I should have kept my suspicions to myself instead of reporting them." I nodded. "Your vigilance was appropriate, Marcus. The problem wasn't that you reported suspicious behavior. It's that the verification systems failed afterward." That afternoon, General Pierce arrived for our scheduled meeting. He saluted crisply as I entered the office that had been hastily prepared for me. "Brilliant operation, sir," he said, though Colonel Grant might never recover from the shock. "This wasn't about embarrassing Grant," I replied, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction. "It was about exposing systemic failures." We spent 2 hours discussing leadership transitions. Pierce had always been a good officer, focused on results rather than appearances. "Karina shows promise," I told him. "Her interrogation techniques were subtle and effective. She nearly caught me in several contradictions." Pierce nodded. "She's been wasted under Grant's command. Too much talent, not enough ego for his taste." Later that day, I personally presented Terrence with a commendation for his thoroughness. He looked confused as I handed him the certificate. "Sir, I was trying to catch you," he admitted. "And you nearly did," I replied. "Your surveillance was textbook perfect. The problem was what happened with the information you gathered. That wasn't your failure." Terrence straightened with pride. "Thank you, sir." That evening, I called an emergency meeting with the base security team. The time had come to reveal the operation's deeper purpose. "Fort Harrison has been leaking classified information for 8 months, I announced. "That's why I was sent here undercover." The room went silent. Even those who'd been briefed on my identity looked surprised. "We've traced the leak to someone with high-level access," I continued. "Someone who could move freely throughout the base without raising suspicion." All eyes turned to Colonel Grant, who had been required to attend. He looked genuinely confused. "It wasn't Grant," I said, though his lax leadership enabled it. I nodded to Brandon, who had positioned himself near the door. He moved quickly, blocking the exit as Evan tried to slip out. "Lieutenant Evan Carter has been sharing classified information with foreign contacts for at least 6 months, I announced. Evan's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous. I've been loyal to Colonel Grant." "Yes, you have," I interrupted, "and you used that loyalty as cover while you accessed and transmitted classified specifications for our new defensive systems." Brandon produced a tablet showing surveillance footage of Evan accessing secure servers after hours. The evidence was damning. "I found the transmissions during my second week here," I explained as security personnel took Evan into custody, "but we needed to understand the full extent of the breach." The next morning, I officially resumed my rank and position. The maintenance coveralls were replaced with my proper uniform. It felt strange after months of blending in. Karina reported to my office at 0800, looking nervous but determined. I'd requested her specifically for this assignment. "Major Williams, effective immediately. You are appointed interim commander of Fort Harrison," I told her. "Your first task is implementing the security protocols outlined in this briefing." She accepted the folder with steady hands. "Thank you for your confidence, sir. I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't," I replied. "You were the only officer who conducted a proper background check on me, even if you couldn't access my real files." At noon, I addressed the entire base personnel in the main assembly hall. Hundreds of soldiers and civilian contractors filled the room, all curious about the maintenance worker who turned out to be a general. "For 3 months, I've worked alongside many of you," I began. "I've fixed your air conditioning, repaired your lighting, and observed your daily operations." I paused, looking across the sea of faces. What I found was a base with dedicated personnel hampered by failed leadership and compromised security. That changes today. I explained the purpose of Operation Base Integrity without revealing classified details. Many looked shocked to learn how easily I'd maintained my cover. Brandon Miller wasn't just visiting an old friend, I continued, gesturing to Brandon. He was monitoring external communications, tracking data leaving this base. Brandon stood and nodded to the crowd. Several maintenance workers looked betrayed that their colleague had been part of the operation. After the assembly, Devon approached me with a knowing smile. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always," I replied. "I knew who you were from day one," he said. "Victor briefed me before you arrived." I raised an eyebrow. "And you never said anything." "That was the point, wasn't it?" Devon shrugged. "Besides, you fixed that junction box in the East Wing that had been giving us problems for months. Good electrical work is hard to find." I laughed for the first time in months. The mission had been successful, but it had also been enlightening. Sometimes you needed to see things from the bottom to understand the problems at the top. Colonel Grant was scheduled for his disciplinary hearing the following week. Evan faced court-martial for espionage, and I had a stack of reports to complete before returning to Washington. But for now, I took a moment to appreciate what we'd accomplished. Fort Harrison would be stronger for this intervention. Sometimes the best way to build something up was to tear away the rot first.